Hey, we're live again.
We are live again. Okay, let's see if anybody's tuning in. 0 viewers. Maybe we really offended them last week, huh?
Maybe they didn't like the topic.
Oh, we've got at least one viewer. That's my mum.
Hi,
Come on,
Mom.
Dad. Come on,
And your
Dad.
sister.
Oh, there we go. Okay, here we go. Got some comments. It is. Taka, it was my sister. Right. We'll wait for the audience to build up a little bit and then we'll get started.
Hi, Chava.
Hello, Chava. How are you? Hope you all have a great week.
Absolutely. We'll have to see if it's been the 4 weeks that we say we were going to do it. We'll have to see how we keep going, or if we keep going, or if we give it a break and then we continue. We'll have the discussion with people.
Fine, no problem at all. Right, let's try and get into it. So this week we have taken the decision to revisit the topic that we discussed last week with our guest Joshua Rowe. I was a little bit taken aback after last week's feedback from several people that wrote in. Not everybody was happy, and it was interesting. Some people felt that we didn't give enough light to both sides of the debate. Some people felt that Josh Rowe, to put it frankly, is a very Marmite character. You either love him or you hate him. And some people have got their opinions. Some people felt that that it was a little bit too positive in terms of the sort of comments that were being made about King David. So we're going to revisit that, and hopefully we can give some light to the other sides of the debate as well. So Chava is shielding. She's enjoying this interaction. She has another month or two to go. So I think Chava wants us to carry on with this.
I think we'll carry on. Hi, Laura.
Good evening, Laura, and hello, Adam. How are you doing?
Hey, Adam Patrick's here.
I do miss Adam Patrick. I've got to tell you, that smiling face every Shabbos morning for me, it makes my Shabbos.
Absolutely.
Right, so we're going to run through a little bit of the feedback that I received last week. I have anonymized it so that nobody can sort of trace it back to its owner. So here we are. This is some of the feedback we got. I'm just going to bear with me a second. I can take that off for a second and allow everybody to see it. Here we go. I'll take that off. Right, here we go. So this was some feedback that we got. Either the title of the talk was inappropriate or you didn't have the representation from the other side of the debate, which never took place. I have no issues with Joshua Rowe, who's been an outstanding and inspirational leader. My children went through the system at King David and we haven't been disappointed. However, tonight was merely a platform for Joshua Rowe to deliver the same message. He dominated the conversation, and Rabbi David Eisenberg was mainly a bystander for most of the evening. I was expecting a debate of some sort, but all I got was a lecture about the virtues of KD. So that was one flavor. Here's another. And I'm going to apologize to anybody who has got a problem with some Yiddish language that is a little bit adult-like. So here we go. I have never seen you so nervous. And the Tochas kissing at minute 46 put down of Borton Jewish. This podcast has caused a stir and the WhatsApp messages are going wild. So it seems, Rabbi, that was sent by somebody who's obviously got kids in Borton Jewish and connections to Borton Jewish. And they were not happy by some of the things that I had said. I was recounting my experiences having moved my children from one educational institution to another, and they thought I was overly friendly to Mr. Rowe. So there we go. Can't please everybody. Here's another lot of comments. I would have preferred to have listened to just you and the rabbi chat about Jewish education. I found it very, very biased, and the rabbi didn't get a word. And so then again, all your fans, Rabbi, want to hear from you.
Have a look. Even David Cohen's just commented.
Let's have a look. Good evening. I agree that it was a sales spiel. Okay. So let's also have a look at some of the positive feedback that we received. Another great discussion, another brilliant show. I thought the way that you handled Joshua Rowe was particularly good. I love the Sunday Night Live discussions, particularly good value for the money, considering I didn't have to pay a penny for it. So,
well, I
there
would
you go.
To comment on that, I would actually say that, you know, you really did ask Joshua some very difficult questions about succession, about other things, and I think that, you know, he didn't answer them very well, but I think you did, you know, you took a stance and you did ask him certain questions. You didn't just let him get off scot-free.
No, I tried to sort of cover those subjects as much as possible. I can understand. I mean, I've had a good long think about it, and I can understand why some people might not like the way that the gentleman handles himself, because he's so absolutely focused and sort of single-minded on his mission, which is obviously everything to do with the success of that institution. And he's very uncompromising in his viewpoint. So I think if you don't agree with him, then in my opinion, you're probably part of the problem. And I mean, he said it himself when it came to shaking up the makeup of the teachers there. He lost, I think, half of the teachers in the first year and then half of the teachers the next year afterwards. So, you know, this is somebody who's not afraid to ruffle a few feathers. And I think that's really what came across in the interview last week. And when we look at the subject of Jewish education, I guess it's too easy to look at it from the point of view of Jewish continuity, because one of the main connections that we make between Jewish education, chinuch, and Jewish continuity is that we are passing down a set of values to our children that we hope stay with them for life. And to me, the only reason why it was so interesting to talk to somebody from King David is that for for children to be interested in anything, and this is any topic, it doesn't even need to be something as fundamental as their belief system or their culture or their roots, but for them to believe in something and to buy into it, it has to be taught with passion. It has to be made interesting. It has to have some vibrance to it. Otherwise, there's plenty of other distractions that they have. And one of the things that I disagree with Joshua Rowe on is that I asked him whether children are more difficult to sort of discipline and to educate in this modern day and age, with the myriad of distractions that they can have, be that an iPad, be it, you know, all the other unhealthy vices that you might wish to talk about or not talk about. They are there, and they're there in abundance today. It's easier to get into any of these things than ever before. And so I think that teaching our youth is more challenging, but he sort of brushed that off. I think he made out that it was just as easy. But
I actually agree with you that I don't think it's the same. I mean, I remember the days when I was in high school and the days when I was in primary school. And we had chutzpah, but I've stood in a classroom, and I think we've supersized the chutzpah. We've gone another level up. The kids are willing to do a lot more. And I think teachers have a lot less in their arsenal as far as retribution is concerned towards the children. There's only that much they can do. And so kids are emboldened by what's going on outside to do much more and to really lash out at the teachers that much more. So I agree with you that I don't think it's the same as to say teaching 30 years ago and now is exactly the same thing. Not at all.
So I couldn't agree more, and I think that it's one of the challenges that I find even as a parent. I think if you want your kids to do something, you know, are you going to bargain with them? Are you going to threaten them? Is it, you know, do we have the same respect that I had for my parents or for my grandparents? I remember the way you would behave in front of your grandparents was entirely different to what you could get away with at home in front of mum and dad. And so, because they came from a very different era when education meant something different, but also discipline was one of these things that absolutely they delegated to the school because, yes, it mirrored the values that were being taught at home. And that leads me to the next point. I've spoken to several people since our discussion last week because we've had so much feedback, both sort of positive and some of it more challenging. And I think that the main thing to come across was that although King David School has been immensely successful in its model, there was some feeling, particularly from Yavna parents, that not everything is as rosy as it could be, and that there are still some challenges over there that perhaps are not necessarily advertised or spoken about. And in actual fact, after digging around, there is this great sort of tension out there with particularly families coming from slightly more religious schools, such as Broughton Jewish, who are making the choice of where to send their children when it comes to grammar schools. There's not an awful lot of choice for them. They feel that they're only left really with Yavna. And what was very interesting was that the times have changed. Certain families that you may think have sort of a Broughton Park pedigree, if you like, so well-known families cannot get into the Jewish high school anymore. They don't meet the current requirements, and Jewish high school are extremely strict when it comes to the quota of people that they will let in every year. They also don't feel confident at the moment sending their children to Yavna, so they feel stuck in between. And apparently, this is particularly with the girls. There seems to be a bit of an effort at the moment from that side of the debate, if you like, to set up a new high school for girls.
Well, the numbers I've been given recently is actually that 26 girls from Broughton Jewish applied to Jewish high school for girls. 3 got in, and 23 were told no. So those 23 girls are left with 2 choices. Either they all march en masse to Yavna, but there's a reason that they chose Jewish High, because they felt that Yavna does not really fit their values, and that Yavna for them is a little bit too left-leaning. Now, for some people, Yavna is too right-leaning. Okay, we can get into that discussion a little bit later. And so there is that issue there where 23 parents are going to say, maybe it's time for us to open up a new school, because if that's what happens to the set of parents within Broughton Jewish, you have well over 20 parents who don't want to send parents of girls, and I'm talking about the boys, parents of girls who don't want to send their children to Yavna, you really will start seeing that that's enough to really run a class. That's enough to start a school with it.
Yeah. And it's probably more than I think Joshua Rowe started Yavna with in the first place, actually. I
think there was only 5. My wife was in Natalie Rowe's class, actually, and Joshua came knocking on my in-laws' house many, many times, trying to convince them to send my wife to Yavna at the time.
Yeah. And I remember at the time when I went to Jewish grammar, but I finished off my education at Berry College, which I've got to tell you was a completely different. Just you couldn't go to anywhere more different than Jewish grammar than walking into somewhere like Berry College. But when I went there, I remember Josh Rowe being on the phone trying to convince my parents to send me to KD, because they were looking at that time to start a Yavna branch for boys. There wasn't one that existed, but it was there. So we've obviously covered the controversies of last week, if you like, in terms of there is more than one side of the debate, and clearly some people are not happy, which we would understand. That's fine, and I don't think we set out to imply that it was an educational utopia that everybody was going to be happy with. One of the comments that I had today was that King David or Yavna may offer a one-size-fits-all type of education, and that's not necessarily what all the parents are looking for. But if we can go back to the core of the question, which was, does every a Jewish child need a Jewish education? One of the people that contacted us said we did not examine the other side of the debate, and so by reference, the other side of the debate then comes down to be: is it okay to send my child to a non-Jewish school? Are there any dangers by giving them a secular education during the day if we supplement it at other times? So over to you, Rabbi.
Okay, so this is a huge, huge discussion, and I don't know that I can give a one-size-fits-all answer, as was said before. Let me put it this way. We have to realize that there are kids that have gone to King David and they've married out, and there are kids that have gone to Manchester Grammar School that have become, bastions, scions of our community. I think actually the most famous Talmud Chacham to come out of Manchester Grammar School is a rabbi by the name of, do you know who it is?
I thought you were going to say Ian Creek.
No, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel. He's a big Kabbalist in Yerushalayim.
I didn't know that.
Very well-known individual, and as I understand it, he actually went to Manchester Grammar School when he was a younger boy. But he's considered quite big. So the question is, and I see Kate has mentioned earlier, there weren't any Jewish schools in Scotland when she grew up. So that's part of it. If there are no Jewish school, there are no Jewish school, then that's not even up for discussion. What are you going to say? Your kid's not going to go to school? You're going to have to send them to a non-Jewish school and supplement. What I would say is twofold. Number one, Jewish education comes in different flavors. That means a Jewish school is not the only mode of Jewish education. You know what I mean? Because you can have Jewish education outside of a Jewish school. I know some parents that from our shul that have sent their child to MGS and have supplemented that with twice a week, 3 times a week Kodesh lessons. Now you might say, well, twice or 3 times a week Kodesh lessons, that's not good enough because they get much more had this child gone to Yamna. Maybe. But for this child, it worked. For another child that I know, gone to MGS, very much lost in the shuffle of everything that's going on over there. But on the other hand, you send your child to King David, you stand a better chance because you're giving them a Jewish education. But you have negatives on that side as well. So let me tell you a story that happened to me about 7 years ago. I'd say about 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. I get a phone call from a young woman, again, no names. And the young woman calls me up. She says, my name is so-and-so. I'm the daughter of so-and-so, one of the daughters of your members in your shul. I said, hi, nice to hear from you. How can I help you? So I just got engaged. Oh, Mazel Tov, you got engaged. Very nice. And we started talking about the weddings and the plans for the weddings, et cetera, et cetera. And the lady says to me, we literally went through everything. I don't know why she left this to the end. She goes, oh, just one last question. I'm going to go on. What's the one last question? My husband's mother converted. Is that a problem? I said, well, it depends where she converted, right? That it doesn't mean that, we cannot have converts. We can't marry a convert. Says, well, she converted by the Reform Beth Din of Blackpool, I think it was, if I remember correctly. I'm like, right, okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to send an email to the Chief Rabbi's office. I knew the answer was no, but I was going to send an email to the Chief Rabbi's office and blame the Chief Rabbi for this one because it was going to be a very difficult, complicated conversation to be had. And so I sent an email to the Chief Rabbi's office, to the office of the Chief Rabbi. I have a young woman that's come to me whose fiance has been converted by the Reform Beth Din of Blackpool. Is this somebody that you would be willing to allow me, to authorize me to marry them? Because all our marriages go through the Chief Rabbi's office, and they come back and they give me authorization to go ahead with the marriage or not to go ahead with the marriage. And what ended up happening is I had to obviously come back to this young woman and say, I'm really sorry. I cannot help you. I can't help you marry this young man. Now, the sad thing was, and here's where I'm coming to it, this young woman had met this young man at King David. They were both students at King David. And here was somebody who was not halachically Jewish. Again, I understand all the difficulties of it. But here was somebody who was not halachically Jewish, who was going to King David, who went to school with this young woman, who then probably went to university. I don't know how old she was when she got engaged, but they must have known each other for quite a few years. And now she wants to get married. She says, I didn't pick this guy up in a bar. I didn't go to town and find somebody, and then it turns out he's not Jewish. I met my spouse at King David High School. And now you're telling me you cannot marry me to this guy because he's not Jewish. So, even sending to King David does not guarantee Jewish continuity. The other question that needs to be asked, and it's a difficult question, is I don't know what the figures are for intermarriage versus marrying in within King David, and how those figures compare to Manchester High or Manchester Grammar School. It could be that they're similar. It could be that King David has a much better level. Now, again, Yavne is a whole different story. You will find very, very few pupils at Yavne will marry out, because you're talking about a much frummer clientele where marrying out is really a pariah. But within King David...
Do you think it's you mentioned the word pariah, so it's the social... The Jewish parent, if you like, their social view of whether or not marrying out is acceptable is something that puts the person off making that life decision.
I don't think so. I think I would hope it's more than that.
It's one of the factors, though.
It is one of the factors. But what I would say is, and this is what I've seen is has created tremendous trouble as far as intermarriage is concerned, is that we have people that want to marry a certain individual, and then the parents say, we don't want you to marry that individual. We're coming back to what you started with about the chutzpah and everything, where it used to be that we took our parents' opinion very seriously, and we're coming to the point where we say, Dad, this is the girl I'm going to marry. Mom, you like her, you don't like her, I'm going to spend the rest of my life with her. You can either decide to embrace me and embrace the spouse that I've chosen, or live without your grandchildren. And many parents, it's just the way it is. And many parents are having to make that difficult, tough decision and saying, okay, I don't want to cut my children out of my life, and therefore going along with it. So it's, the pariah thing is not working the same way it used to. But I think it's more important than that. And this is one of the points I was maybe coming back to, was going to come back to later, but I think we'll mention it even now. And then we can come back to the discussion about, King David and the schools, everything. A friend of mine once asked me, he said, how would I explain to somebody, he was doing some kiruv work, he says, how would I explain to somebody why we are against marrying out? Isn't it really almost racist? Yeah? You can't marry a guy, you can't marry a non-Jew. Well, the old guy, that sounds almost like, and the old shtetl, the old guy, etc., etc. Yeah. So why don't we, what would I say to someone like that? I said, my view of it and the way I would explain it is very simple. If I look at my life, and then we'll come back to the life of somebody else, and that's, if I look at my life, I have minyan, I have kosher, I have shabbos, I have all these things in my life that I do as part of how I run my life. The only individual that I can trust, and the only individual that can actually be my partner for the life that I want to live as a Jewish individual is a Jewess, is another woman who's Jewish. There's so many issues, so that even if you say, well, you can find a non-Jewish woman who will support you and wake you up every morning to go to minyan, probably. But in the end of the day, to live a Jewish life, to raise Jewish children, etc., unless I marry a Jewish woman, or vice versa, if a Jewish woman wants to raise a Jewish family, unless you marry a Jewish husband, you will have a very hard time raising an authentically Jewish, and I'm saying this word on purpose, authentically Jewish person. Whereas if you are somebody who is only marginally Jewish, so that your Judaism exists as the Judaism exists around, let's say, coming 3 times a year to shul, but kosher doesn't really exist in your household. Shabbos doesn't really exist. Davening doesn't really exist. Most of Judaism doesn't really exist in your household. And then you come home and you bring a young woman who's not Jewish to your family, and you say, Dad, Mom, this is the person I want to marry. And they look and go, well, and we'll use the word again, pardon the language, but she's a shiksa. How can you marry a shiksa? Da, 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 da. And, and then they say, you can't marry this woman. And he's like, why not? Well, Jewish continuity. For the Judaism that I do, I can marry a non-Jewish woman. For the 3 times a year I need to go to shul, she's in it all the way. For the I don't eat kosher, she'll come with me to all the non-kosher restaurants. I want something kosher at home, she can make me the kosher food. And even if it's not 100% kosher, I'm not that particular about kosher, because I go out and eat kosher, I eat non-kosher all over the place anyway. So when people are trying to create this, and this is, I think the younger generation is moving away from what the old generation did. The old generation says, I don't live a Jewish life, but I will always marry a Jewish spouse. And the younger generation is saying, wait a minute, I don't live a Jewish life. Why do I need to be married to someone Jewish to live that mainly non-Jewish and very slightly Jewish life that I'm living? And so therefore they don't see it as a problem.
So we're getting some comments. This is a very emotive discussion. So first of all, I'd like to say hello to Hannah Zatman, who's joined us this evening. She is, I believe, I think she's indicating she was a Yavna alumni previously. And one of the comments,
you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, no,
put it.
So she's there, but basically, Hannah, one of the comments she's made that this perspective is archaic. I think what's interesting is,
which perspective?
I think the perspective that well, maybe all of it. I don't know. Maybe Hannah. Oh, here we go. Hannah's going to. There needs to be more representation and flexibility of options within Jewish education to keep the youth engaged. So I think this is probably very true. In terms of here's another Yavna alumni, my sister. But going back to what you were saying at the beginning, take me for instance. If you would have asked me, I don't know, age 7 or 8, I would have sworn to you I was going to marry a girl called Anna Frankel, who was in my class at Broughton Jewish and lived across the road from me. I ended up not seeing her after I went off to high school. It never happened, and I went 2,000 miles across the world to Israel and ended up meeting a girl that had come from Germany, Jewish, but she had been educated her entire life at a Catholic high school because there was no Jewish high schools in Germany. So there was no sort of, I'd had all the best chances, if you like, but it was my life decisions that sort of made me gravitate to that particular person, and I felt a particular pull. And I guess that one of the factors, we talk about Israel, we talk about education, and one of the things that, going back to the question of King David and what it does, is that Hannah's probably right. Sometimes people don't buy into the whole religious argument of you need to marry a good Jewish girl. It might not be enough to keep you engaged with your religion, but Zionism not interesting enough necessarily.
Why would anybody marry a Jewish girl just because somebody else said so? When they have what's the pull to marry it? What's the need or the necessity to marry a Jewish girl?
It's a question. It comes down to Jewish culture and Jewish religion being so closely intertwined that it's not enough to just be a fan of Woody Allen's comedy or something to consider yourself Jewish. You like a hot salt beef sandwich every now and again, you must be Jewish. But there is this, I think these days, there is this sense that people want to try and have their cake and eat it. That they want to be able to pick and choose what they do sort of keep and don't keep, what they believe in, what they don't believe in. And I think that society today allows that flexibility of choice. It's much more respected. So that this issue of having, perhaps upsetting your parents or your grandparents if you marry the wrong type of person, that's gone now, because there is this expectation that the parents should be very, very much more reasonable with their expectations of the children. So I don't think it happens as much. But let's have a look at some of the comments, because they're very interesting. I'm going to backtrack a little bit.
I just see them coming through, but we're talking so much I can't.
True, but I think this will tell us where the discussion is going. So Chava has made a couple of comments. One is slightly more tamer than the other. So there is no guarantee. It has to be a much wider discussion about intermarriage and shul and homes as well as schools. And I think that a lot of people would agree with Clive's comment that a good Jewish home is the biggest positive influence on the child's Jewish future. Again, I suppose if you see your parents behaving in a certain way, or they subscribe to certain cultural values that resonate with you, you may stand a good chance of wanting to stick with that.
Yeah, but on the other hand, coming back to that comment of Clive, if you end up going, so we'll just now try to go the other side. If you go to MGS and you grew up in a very nice religious or semi-religious home, and those Jewish values really resonated with you, and then you start having the conversations with some of your non-Jewish friends, and they start saying, oh, that's all old and archaic, come join us. And as a 16-year-old, sometimes it's very easy to sway you from where you were to what's a lot cooler. Because my guess is, and chances are that, hanging out with your 16 or 18-year-old friends, many of whom are not Jewish and who come from very well-respected, successful backgrounds in places like MGS, they'll go out with you. You'll have a great time on a Friday night. And sometimes it's not enough. You're going to get that mixed message in a non-Jewish school versus your Jewish home. Having said that, in King David, I'm sure there's plenty of clubbing that goes on Friday nights in King David as well. Let's not kid ourselves. We're dealing with young teenagers, many of whom are not Shomer Shabbat. So, you might have the same thing in KD as well.
Which again is fine if they if that is their choice. But Chava has commented again. I told my boys not to. I'm presuming not to come home if they either kill somebody or marry out, and that's a very extreme view of it. I would recommend that you do have them home if they kill somebody. Here we go. Rodney Barkley, we told our children to ask their boy or girlfriends which shul their parent got married in. Sorry? At what point? Presumably, hello, my name is Andrew. Pleased to meet you. Where did your parents get married?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Part of the issue is that sometimes the relationship has gone far enough that at this point to start asking the question of where her parents got married is actually very rude. You've been going out with this girl for 6 months to a year, and suddenly you're asking her if she's Jewish or not. Like, what, am I not good enough for you? Why are you suddenly asking me that question?
Yeah.
And so it feels almost like you're backtracking. Hey, wait a minute. I'm not sure if I trust you. So that'll also make for a very awkward discussion.
We're going to have a look at some other comments. Michael Lurie, what about a girl marrying a non-Jewish man? Is that less of a stigma because the children are Jewish? It seems to be focused on a non-Jewish girl. You're right. I suppose we've focused it too strongly on the male meeting the wrong type of person. It can happen any way you wish.
Yeah, and let's call a spade because there are actually statistics done. So let's say even if you have a Jewish girl that marries a non-Jewish man, so you will have Jewish children. But the statistics show that children of an intermarriage are basically 80 or 85% likely to intermarry themselves. So that, yes, you might have stemmed the tide for one generation, but at the end of the day, you've not shown your children the chinuch that you want them. You could never say to your child, I think you should marry Jewish, because you yourself didn't marry Jewish. And probably you're not living the most Jewish life, because if you were living such a rich Jewish life, you wouldn't be marrying somebody who wasn't Jewish. So you're not setting yourself up or your children up for success in this, in this endeavor. And so that maybe you'll say, well, I've even asked Aish that question at one point. I said, you know what, you're stopping people from intermarrying, but you're not taking them much further than that. Yeah. All you're doing is you're kicking the ball down the road another 20 years. But in 20 years' time, you're going to have the same conversation with these,
Well, I think Aish hoped that seed eventually take over. But that's true. There's a gap. There's a lot of people that got Aished. They went through the Aish system. They get imbibed with this enthusiasm for their religion and their culture. They come out of it very frum, and then they feel like they're on their own all of a sudden, and it isn't enough anymore because that enthusiasm that wanes slightly. But maybe this is the crux of the debate. Clive Moss Barkley said, when us oldies were young, Jewish continuity was the most important, more than any aspect of Jewish life. Let's face it, Clive, you probably come from an age group where you are senior enough to have been one of the first generations after the Holocaust. And when you frame the debate of continuity in terms of the vast numbers that were lost in the Holocaust, that's right. The absolutely overriding imperative on everybody at that time was to repopulate the 6 million souls that had perished. And I think that's why that generation took intermarriage as such a massive threat, because they had managed to survive the worst atrocities of the Second World War, and yet they were going to let it all go for the sake of romance, if you like, or somebody not wanting to stay in the club. And so I think in those days, Jewish continuity was much more of an ongoing debate than it is today. I think it's still something that Rabbonim always talk about. All the Jewish newspapers are always filled with articles about Jewish continuity and intermarriage and all that sort of. It's one of those hot topics. But have we become bored of it?
We might have become bored of it. I think the idea, even, I mean, some people say that you bring people to, Aish does this quite a bit. They bring people to Poland and you show them what people went through. But there are a lot of people that take the view that say, well, you know what, it's terrible what the Nazis did, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, obviously we're not condoning it. I'm just speaking on their behalf. However, why does that mean just because the Nazis killed 6 million people, I can't marry the love of my life? You know, it starts getting very, very gray. And people are not seeing it like that. And in the same way, you and I have had the discussion even about Israel, that people's Zionism nowadays is a lot more lukewarm than it was in the 1950s. And how you explain
for the same reason,
anything to, you know, for the state of Israel. And that, you know, but we saw it at the time as this fledgling state to help poor refugees from all over the place after the war to find a place, to find a home. Today, Israel can be seen as an economic superpower. It's the startup nation. It's got tremendous, you know, all sorts of things. It's got tremendous weapons, tremendous other things. It's really, really difficult to then start talking in terms of, you know, Israel being the Nebuch state. And so people have also lost the oomph, so to speak, to really go in there and to fight for it and to represent it.
For me, the loss of enthusiasm for Israel, and I know that it's tough, because to be an advocate for Israel now means something entirely different than it did in 1945, 1948, 1950s. My grandparents' generation, like I said, yes, they would have given their right arm for Israel, and in terms of the vast amount of charity sums that have been given by the Manchester Jewish community and London and anywhere in England towards the state of Israel in all its different guises, UJA, JNF, you name it, over the years, we're talking many, many thousands, if not millions of pounds that have gone that way. It was important, again, in the context of the Holocaust and in context of continuity. We always had in the back of our mind that if we became unwelcome here, or anywhere that we lived, we would always have a home to go to over there.
That's right.
And, you know, history teaches us that's probably a nice insurance policy to have. Hannah has once again asked some challenging questions. I like that we've got Hannah with us. Thanks for asking these. What does the Jewish girl in question want? Well, Clive Moss Barkley answers that: to have Jewish children.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily at all. But Hannah asked a follow-up
question once.
I think she has to follow.
She wants to. She doesn't.
Why are we maneuvering her through life? Isn't she an intelligent human being making her own choices? So I am sure if that young Jewish woman is anything like the young Jewish women I know, then yes, she is a very intelligent human being and capable of that negotiating life's obstacles. But Hannah, would you not say that it is important that we as parents pass down a set of values to our children? It may not be what they choose, and it may not be what they go on to sort of respect and hold as their own, but I think every parent, whether
every parent brainwashes their children. Even if you're a liberal, you're brainwashing your children to be liberal people, right? And so therefore, there's no such thing as a parent who just lets go and says, my child is intelligent, they'll figure it out on their own. Parents believe, hopefully, in whatever system they have. You know, you'll speak to Christian parents, they believe very strongly what they have. You speak to Muslim, they'll believe very strongly what they have. You speak even to secular, to humanist people, they'll also believe very strongly in what they say. And they want their children to be humanists. They don't look at their children and say, no humanist has ever said, you know what, let my child try out religious education because I think maybe they're intelligent enough to go out and to figure it out. They might not stop them from doing that, but they would very much like their child to continue in their footsteps. And we as Jewish people understand, or we feel, at least definitely amongst the religious, we've been given a gift. And because we've been given that gift, this is a gift that we'd like to pass on. It's a gift we'd like to pass on to our sons. It's a gift we'd like to pass on to our daughters. It's a gift we'd like to pass on to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And it's a blessing. And some people say, well, why don't you let other people make intelligent choices? You know what? If they want to make those intelligent choices, they can, and plenty of them do, and plenty of them walk. There's a big, big group of people that are either, as they call them, OTD, off the derech, or become whatever you want to call them, become more secular. There's a huge amount of people moving away from the religious side to the secular side, and those people made their choices.
It's interesting because I think the polarization that exists today, if you choose as a young person to be frum, the likelihood is you are frummer than your parents were. If you are not frum, and then the likelihood is you're far less frum than your parents were.
I think that's true.
The gap in the middle has widened tremendously.
That's true for middle-of-the-road Judaism. I don't know if that's true so much in the frummer sector. So I think in the more Mizrahi sector, and certainly in the more Haredi sector, I think people more or less stay within the same thing. But I find very much for middle-of-the-road traditional Judaism, such as our shul, looking at the children of and grandchildren of the parents, of the parent body of our shul, they are either more religious or less religious. Very few of them have stuck to exactly the same path that the parents have stuck to.
Let's try and work through some of the other comments. So from Kate, my mum specifically pushed her children away from Scotland to study in England at university in order for us to meet Jewish spouses, which is interesting because obviously your pool of fish is a lot smaller in Scotland than it will be in England. Hannah commented again. We're going to just I'm going to address this quickly, and we will move on to somebody else. But it's not about cool. It's about choosing yourself, defining yourself, living your own life rather than being subservient to a patriarchal dogma. What's interesting is about the Abrahamic faiths, they are by definition very patriarchal. However, if you've met your average Jewish lady, you will know she very much knows her own mind, and there's certainly no question in modern Jewish households anyway, the way that we're raising our daughters. I think they've got much better access to education, life choices, careers. We no longer subscribe to the set of values that perhaps my grandparents' generation did. Yeah. A 1950s housewife who was there to meet her husband when he came home and waved him off in the morning, and that was it. But I don't think. What I
would say is, even though Judaism can be seen as patriarchal like that, I just gave a shir on this on Friday, and I found it. I asked the question, and to many frum girls, who actually runs your household? And the answer overwhelmingly was, and let me ask you, David, I don't know what you'd say, but the answer overwhelmingly was my mother. Right? As much as we like to say, the man is the head of the household, most people know that all the decisions, the real decisions, if dad says A and mom says B, B is what will end up happening. Right? I know that's I know in my parents' house like that. It's probably in our house it's like that. In the end of the day, as much as you want to call that patriarchal society, you can still, not look away from the fact that women have and do hold and wield a tremendous amount of power in their home, over their family, and over what happens in their household.
Fair comment. Esther Bitan-Spitzer, I understand that your benchmark on marrying in or out, but it's sad that Jewish education has been taken down to the lowest denominator. Shouldn't we be educating our children to love all that we love and to embrace Judaism because we love it and it's the best way of life? Jewish education is far more vital than just not marrying out. This is from Modi. And it's interesting because David Cohen made a comment later. I'm sorry, but we're not discussing the title of the evening. I think, David, that was a comment that was made last week because we keep in the subject of Jewish education and choosing whether or not to educate your child in a Jewish school or non-Jewish school, it gravitates back to this question of Jewish continuity so often. And so therefore, you can see by the comments that are coming in, David, the comments is what drives the debate, not necessarily the title of it. And it's nice to have a bit of interaction. But looking at what Modi said, yes, it is sad that we have to bring it down to the lowest denominator. And the lowest denominator is we need Jewish education to ensure Jewish continuity, or to give us a better chance at Jewish continuity.
Right. I would say, though, that in many of the frommer circles, Jewish education is not about Jewish continuity. It's about so much more. And I think the reason we've brought it down to the lowest common denominator is because we are now talking in general about King David, where you're dealing with mainly secular parents. And so as Joshua Rowe mentioned last week, the discussion is, as the Chief Rabbi Sachs spoke about, will your grandchildren be Jewish? It's all about giving the children enough tools or enough education for them to make that one choice: I don't want to marry out. I don't think in King David, Yavne is a different story, but I don't think in King David, Jews are being prepared to live a full, rich life. And I don't think the parent body is sending to King David to get that sort of education. That's not what they're in there for. They want the secular education, and the Jewish education some aren't willing to pay for, as we heard for last week, and the others that are willing to pay for it want it in small doses, a bit of Ivrit, a bit of Hashkafa, ideology, a bit of Jewish history. They don't want to know what you can or cannot do on Shabbos because it doesn't matter to them. They don't want to know about kashrus, all the ins and outs, because it's not really that important and that primal on their on their conscience. And so therefore, when you speak about Jewish education, Modi is right that we're looking at the lowest common denominator, but it's for a reason that we're looking at the lowest common denominator. I wish we could set the bar higher. I wish we, but I think at the moment, as within the definitely within KD, that's where the bar is set. As you move up and up, more to the right, the bar is set much higher.
Well, let's just talk about moving to the right a little bit, because again, you've got an entire different set of challenges within the very frum side of the community, often referred to as the Haredi side of the community, in terms of population growth is huge, absolutely massive, for obvious reasons, and that with that comes educational challenges and also struggle to obtain resources to support the education system for Haredi children. So there are some amazing success stories out there, and we too often in the middle or to the left of that line, wherever you wish to draw it, we too often make the mistake of thinking that Haredi schools are badly run, that they don't get a well-rounded education, that they're not churning out fine, upstanding members of the community because they don't choose to educate their children like I do. Yeah, that's the way that we look at it. But there's a school that caught my eye a few years ago. We've discussed this. A school like Tiferes, I think, that was for for girls. What's interesting about Tiferes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rabbi Eisenberg, but it has a waiting list of people waiting to get in, which that's not in itself is not strange, considering there's a severe shortage of school places for Haredi families. But they make it incumbent on the people to pay, to prove that they can pay full fees from day one, because people are, and where there's always a strain to get money for Jewish tuition on the non-Haredi side of the community, that particular school's cracked it. They've set the bar so high in terms of the standard of the school and the results that they achieve and the sort of young lady that they're churning out, that people are willing to actually sort of pay their school fees up front to get the kids in. Is that correct?
It is correct, but I think it's also, I know the head mistress. I know, and I don't know if you met her husband as well. They're both very Yekish. And basically what they said right from the start was, listen, we're creating a school, but this school, you want to send your child to the school. Why do I have to schnorr for you to be able to put this child through the school? Most schools have a deficit. We even heard last week how King David had a deficit, and they had to schnorr from the community over £1 million to be able to secure the next 2 years. That's all they got out of it, is only 2 years, even though they got over £1 million worth of tzedakah. And so he said, look, I know it's hard to keep this place going. I know it's going to take a lot of resources, but I would like to have, I need you in this as a partner. I'm going to make sure that the school works, but I need you to say, you know what, this is important enough for me to pay the £250 a month that it's going to cost to send my child to this school. And if you say I can only pay 150, then find a way to bring in the extra £1,000 a year. Why do I have to find a way to bring in the extra £1,000 a year? I put the onus on you. You find a way to put on. And people are saying it's important enough for me to send to that school. It's important enough for me, my Jewish education, that even if I can't afford it, I'll make it work somehow. So I think, again, that shows the commitment on that side of the community. And the commitment on that side of the community is not, it's a big commitment. People are making big commitments with their kids. The amount of money that I spend every month on my children's education is well into the 4 figures.
That has always been a Jewish value, if you like, in terms of the importance of education. And it doesn't necessarily matter whether that is a Jewish education or not. It's education in general that we place as being extremely important.
Yeah.
I'm going to read through some of the comments. There's so many of them that I hope we get time to address them all, but we'll try and race through them a little bit. Chava Erlang, again, it is an extreme view, but when I think I give my boys the message that killing somebody in marrying out is the end of the line for me, and I will not tolerate it. I think parents are so scared of sticking to principles in case they lose their children. I see myself as a very tolerant and accepting person. If my kids know there is a certain line, and if they cross it, they will break my heart, and they respect that, which is fair enough. Clive Moss Barkley quickly comments that middle-of-the-road Judaism was more acceptable back in those days. So middle-of-the-road Judaism these days, by some people's standards, is seen as settling for less. Laura Greenberg, surely they should be educated to know not to start a relationship which would cause them personal problems. That was explained to me as a child, and I left home at 16, and it was never an issue to go out with a halachically non-Jewish person. It depends. I don't think there's a guarantee if you were to set those guidelines that anybody's going to want to necessarily adhere to them. Hannah Zatman has commented again. I'm gonna try and get through this. Hannah, forgive me. I'm not ignoring you. We just want to give some airtime to other people as well. Rabbi Eisenberg, sadly, your perspective misses the mark for my generation, and my generation is of an age to be deciding which school to send their 11 plus children to. Imagine the gap between what you're saying and the age group you're discussing. The age group you're discussing is influencing world discussion. Look at someone like Greta Thunberg. Have you asked the perspective of the people you're discussing? If not, I'm afraid you'll alienate them, and this discussion is just academic. I guess, Hannah, by allowing this to be an open forum that everybody can comment on and get involved with, I think the answer's there. We do want to hear from everybody with all different sort of perspectives.
I would say yes, but your Greta Thunberg is your exception. She's not the rule. The world is still very much being influenced mainly by adults, and we as adults will make those decisions. Now, it could be that what I'm saying is alienating people, but the proof is in the pudding. The lesser educated and the lesser religious part of the community is shrinking. And if you were to look at, there's a famous statistical part that they did a study, will your grandchildren be Jewish? And they went through it for secular people in America. They did the study in America for Haredi Jews, for modern Orthodox Jews, for conservative, for Reform, and for secular. I can actually let me see if I can find the exact numbers. I'm going to Google it in the background. And so the numbers were actually staggering and very, very scary.
You Google that. Whilst you Google that, I'll read a couple of other comments. Kate Laurie has commented, I guess Jewish education stops intermarriage. And David Cohen has responded, Kate, the statistics don't show that. So that's something that you're looking at now, Rabbi.
Right. So here we go. So this was a study done by two statisticians, Rabbi Anthony Gordon and Richard M. Horowitz. It was done twice. Once in 1990, and I think it was done again in 2000 or 2001. the Hasidic or Yeshiva Orthodox. In the first generation, if you started off with 100 people, 4 generations later, you'd be left with 3,400 Jews, because I guess, the rate is so massive. The average children per woman is 6.45. Centrist Orthodox, with 100 people, you would have about 337 4 generations later, because they have an average of 2.96 children. In the conservative, you're looking at 100 children down to 52. So you're already 4 generations down, you have 52. They have only 1.82 children. The intermarriage rate at the time was 24%. In the Reform, you had 100 people. The child rate was only 1.73. And the intermarriage rate was 79%. And so you're left with only 13 Reformed Jews left in the 4th generation after you started with 100. And for the secular, if you start with 100, you get your way all the way. The intermarriage rate is 85%. The amount of children they have per person is only 1.45. You're left with only 4 children, 4 Jewish people, 4 generations later. So that was, that's the statistics. Like it or leave it, that's the statistics that show it. So you say, I'm alienating people, I'm being archaic, et cetera, et cetera. Call it what you like. The numbers are there. Read it and weep. The bottom line is, people who don't want to interface with Judaism stand a much, much better chance that their children will intermarry. That's just the way it is. There's no way around it. It's a fact.
Right, let's have a look at some of the other comments. Jeff Radovan, when I was a teenager, we had youth clubs and our shul hosted a youth club. Today, we don't have organized youth clubs. Interesting, Jeff, because this does obviously feature in this debate. Today, I think with the proliferation of Jewish schools, Jewish youth clubs and youth organizations have waned as well. So B'nai Akiva's numbers are down. Ezra, there used to be Habonim, BBYO, you name it. It is not as important as it was, both in terms of modern Zionist views, but also in terms of the supplementing cultural Jewish identity for children who may have been educated outside of a Jewish educational system and therefore needed these youth clubs because it was their only touch point with other Jewish youths of similar background. Shifra Mint, I'm with Esther. More carrot, less stick. Also, I do not wish for my identity to be defined by persecution or fear. Our religion and our culture is much, much more than that.
Absolutely.
I'll be honest with you. That was always a discussion in our house growing up. I had a problem as a child growing up with Holocaust education and the way that we always used to sort of talk about negatives and fear. Now, Jane. So, Jane, I'm going to be a little more kind with the language than you might have been. As a non-Jewish person hoping to convert, I completely understand the importance of not marrying out. Judaism is a whole way of life which you're inevitably giving up if you marry someone not Jewish. And how do you bring up the kids? Too confusing. That's a really valid comment, Jane. It can be very confusing to children if you give them conflicting messages, which is generally why our view of marriage as a stable background is that it's one homogenized sort of view of life that you are passing down to your children. In the modern day and age, that's not a given anymore. But let's have a look. Hannah, I'd be interested to hear Rabbi Eisenberg's response to the comment directed to him. Also, I'm very aware of statements that begin every parent, if allows. I think we've addressed that. Moving on. Esther Bitan Spitzer. With all due respect, a rabbi is and should be a leader. Young and old may not always be right. Just because Hannah's contemporaries have views that are far off those of Rabbi Eisenberg, it only further highlights the issues of assimilation and not the opposite of making us bend to those views. That's from Modi. Let's have a look at some of these other comments. This is not about intelligence. It's about the continuation of a lineage of what we believe in. My belief in God and Torah comes before education. However, if my kids marry out, it would break my heart. So Chava is clearly sticking to her story. Hannah, again, I personally think that if Judaism held space for a more variety of religious expression, then a lot of disengaged Jews might choose to stay involved because they feel represented. Hannah, it's interesting. If you go to places like America, there's literally, we have very few shades of Jew compared to America. In America, you can find every brand of Judaism, whether you affiliate entirely with it, whether you wish to look at the religious side of it, if it's just the cultural side of it. I think the choice exists out there. I think we're talking about, in Manchester, we're used to narrowing our views to either one side or the other. And if you were lucky, you end up somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, but that's what I was saying, that in America, all these choices exist, but the choices have not proven engagement in Judaism. The choices have proven disengagement from Judaism.
Okay, here we go. I thought this discussion was about Jewish education. Please, can we get back to the topic? Are we not discussing the topic, Rabbi? Am I on a completely different...
Look, let's see. If people want to ask specific questions about Jewish education, let's get back into that one. We could, I think there are many interesting discussions to be had over here. I think, quite honestly, I think if Hannah really wanted to discuss this, she needs to pick up the phone to me, because I see there's comments coming.
He's there. Well, it's interesting.
I don't think it works. This is a very one-sided discsion.
Maybe.
It's not really a fair discussion here. She's not getting a fair hearing.
Hannah's background is very interesting, because she said she had an excellent Jewish education. She went to Broughton Jewish, then she went to Yavna, she went to Brovender Sem, and yet she's still disengaged. There was no one representing a stance that represented me. That's
what is that stance?
I don't know. I guess Hannah will say us. Will tell us. Let's have a look here. Right, we've got some more comments coming in. I'm going to try and get through them all. Laura Greenberg, Jewish education should encompass all areas.
Correct.
Shifra, the population is back up to pre-war numbers. The Haredi community is growing. So where's the issue with continuity? Are you really saying that we have an issue with continuity of this type of Jewish community? That's a much better question, I suppose.
Well, the issue is continuity, not amongst the Haredi community. And the reason we're back to pre-war numbers is because even though the United Synagogue and traditional style Judaism is going down in the numbers, the Haredim, with a tremendous birth rate, are making up for that. But we definitely have an issue of Jewish continuity in one sector of the community. And just to say, well, another sector of the community is going to survive, that's not a very good answer. We don't want only one sector of the community to survive. We don't want to say, well, the Haredim will be the last man standing. They'll always be Jews, and everybody else will marry out Shalom Yisrael. That's not a very good answer. We want there to be all types of Jews, but the Jews from the other parts of the spectrum are disengaging and are walking out, quite frankly.
Okay, let's have a quick look here at some other comments. Kate Norrie, some more than others. However, some teachers are really fun and engaging. So I think there's a discussion here about Jewish teachers in general, and whether or not they're engaging, and whether what they're offering to children are engaging. So to try and bring it back, they would like to bring it back to education solely. You currently you teach from time to time in schools.
So I will tell you, I'm actually one of the most schizophrenic people in Manchester, because I actually teach in Yavne and in King David, but I also teach in Mechina, which is one of the frommest schools within the entire spectrum. So if you were to look at the spectrum, this is further right than right. So I really, I span the spectrum from all sides. And teaching, let's go back to the question. What was your question about the teaching, though? I do teach.
I guess you know more than most then, therefore, on the different types of teaching. So when you go and teach in Yavna, and you teach in KD, and then you're going to go and teach in somewhere like Mechina,
yes,
it must be chalk and cheese. It must be completely different.
It's chalk and cheese. So when I teach in Mechina, I teach halacha. So I come in. Everybody assumes that they're going to keep halacha, and everybody wants to more or less know what I have to say, because this is relevant to them in their day-to-day life. They want to know what they need to do for the 3 weeks and the 9 days that are coming up. It's not a question, are there 3 weeks? Should I keep the 3 weeks? Should I fast on Shiva Asar Tammuz or not? I'm fasting on Shiva Asar Tammuz. When should I start? When I need to finish? What am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? In Yavne, I cannot speak that much for Yavne, because in Yavne, mainly my job is to give assemblies. So I cannot speak about what the education is like there or what it's not like, because I know I'm very friendly with the Rabbonim that teach there. So I'm friendly with Rabbi Penny Cohen, and I'm friendly with Rabbi Shalom Schwalbe and Rabbi Shaya Klein. And I'm also very good with Gideon Leventhal, and they're all very good people. But I don't know what their level is, but I know they're doing their level of engagement is very. I know that Rabbi Schwalbe is very engaging. He's alive, he's funny, he's got a great sense of humor. And when I used to teach more in the school, I knew the boys used to love him. They really used to warm to him and his type. I know when I speak in King David, things have been totally different. So I'm not talking halacha, and I'm not talking gemara, I'm not talking anything. So the one lesson recently I taught in King David is RS, what is the job of a rabbi? And so we just discussed basically what a rabbi does in his day.
Yeah,
that was it. But so you see that it varies very much from. And if I were to sort of say, let me go and let me give a share on the details of Shabbos or the details of the 3 weeks in King David, I would be totally laughed out of that classroom. Because Rabbi, what are you talking about? Nobody does this. Nobody keeps this anymore. And so I would have to take my entire whatever I'm doing and say, let's discuss a very different discussion. We're not going to assume that you're doing this. We're not going to say, we're just going to discuss the relevance of it and how it makes sense even to a Jew living in the 21st century that the Chorban Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of the temple, is still something that can be relevant to us today. But that's a very, very different discussion.
It's interesting. Clive Moss Barkley has given us his bottom line. He wants to know, Rabbi Eisenberg, is there a future for our community?
It's a very good question. And the question comes down to education, leadership, shuls, families, many, many different factors. But the answer to that question is, if we don't stem the tide soon, and if people get more and more disengaged, then sadly there will be very little future, because what's going to happen is what David said before. You will either get those people that look at their parents and say, you're sort of like a halfway house, not here, not there, a bit of Shabbos, bit not of Shabbos. You go to shul, then you watch the football match. And people are like, why would I go to shul and then go watch the football? I could just go watch the football. Or why do I watch the football? I go to shul. So they'll have to make a decision. The type of Jew that's going to say it makes sense to go to watch the football in the morning, to go to shul in the morning, watch the football in the afternoon, that Jew is slowly going out of style. Either you're going to go watch the football or you're going to go to shul. Now, it's our job as Rabbonim, as educators, as schools, as communities, et cetera, to make sure many more people choose to go to shul. But this middle ground where people say, I am going to continue going to shul in the morning and watching the football, that's disappearing. So we'll have to see what's going to happen there.
So people are having their own debates within the chat group, which we simply haven't got time to address all of it now, because we're going to have to let you go very shortly, Rabbi Eisenberg. I'm mindful of the time. We've been going for over 1 hour and 7 minutes, and still 35 people have got nothing better to do than listen to us on a Sunday night, for which we're very, very grateful. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is one of those subjects which, whichever way you look at it and however many times you come back to it, there's always going to be something that people will want to debate about it. And whether you come from an Orthodox, old-fashioned standpoint, a modern Orthodox standpoint, or whether you're conservative or reform, whatever your view on this is, there is a definite link between our views on the importance of Jewish education and how they play into continuity, Jewish continuity. And that's why, gentlemen and ladies, but the gentlemen were the ones that asked the question, that is why this discussion seems circuitous, and we keep coming back to the same thing. SD Brook has thrown in a late comment. Maybe we are being too lazy as parents. Maybe we need to take the responsibility of keeping our kids engaged with the Judaism that we want them to have, and not to leave them to whichever school they're in. We also need to try and make sure our kids are confident enough in their Jewish identity to be able to socialize and mix with people in the wider community and not keep them in a bubble. perhaps it's up to us as parents and not so much the school. And that, I suppose, goes back to the comments last week. I asked, one of the questions that I asked to Joshua Rowe was, are we as parents guilty of delegating our responsibilities to the school and expecting the school to produce the sort of individual that we want? And I guess the answer to that is that, yes, as much as kids may become lazy these days, we as parents, we're lazy. And the reason why this debate makes everybody such an authority on education is because as parents, we too often make the mistake of thinking we're doing the right thing when it comes to education. So yeah, I've ticked a box. My kids are in King David. I know that they will be. And again, one of the questions we were asked was, would it bother us if our children were to mix with people that perhaps were not Jewish, not from a Jewish background? Maybe one of the parents was Jewish. You couldn't guarantee which one. Would you mind that they eat together? Would you mind that they play together? And our answer to that was yes, yes, yes. We don't mind to any of that, because we believe in giving our children exposure to different walks of life, and we feel that we can balance it with our Jewish values at home so that it doesn't become a danger for us necessarily. And I believe that if we're accepting enough, then that can also be a value. But it's not the same for everybody, is it? It really isn't. But I just one of the things that Hannah said, and I love you for this, Hannah. Thanks for the discussion. It's the most engaged with the community I've been for the last decade.
Well, two thumbs up for that. Thank you for tuning in, Hannah. Tune in again, please.
Hannah, that you're more than welcome every Sunday night. There we go. Well said, Esty from Laura Greenberg. David Minton, Rabbi Eisenberg for finding new ways to engage. It's the future. We enjoy it. We got a bit of a rough time last week, but we're going to keep going, I think. Going back to the top.
To finish off.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to put on that comment?
Going back to the topic where the secular education is a viable option for children, Daniel's experience of secular education was a lack of basic values and ethos, e.g. treat others how you wish to be treated, which can create a very harsh environment. That's interesting. Okay. That's interesting. Would you like to finish off? I'm going to let you have the floor.
Yeah, I think I'm going to finish off with the following. And I think this topic, as we said, it might have strayed a little bit from what we wanted to say, but I want to bring it back to what it was. Thank you, Simon, for that. And that's the following. Jewish education is extremely important. But as David said, we cannot delegate our Jewish education just to the schools and say, you know what, you go to Jewish school, you get 3, 4, 5 lessons of Judaism a week. That's going to keep you Jewish. That's not going to keep you Jewish. It's not going to do it. And sometimes you can send your kids to a non-Jewish school and give them enough Jewish values to actually come out a better Jew than having sent your child to a Jewish school where they're not really getting those Jewish values. So to say you have to send your child to a Jewish school is actually not necessarily correct. You know, you'd think the rabbi would say, of course you have to send your child to the Jewish school. The answer to the question is it preferable? Yes, it's preferable. Is it a guarantee? There are no guarantees in life. The only thing you can do is create a Judaism at home and in school that's vibrant, that's enjoyable, that your children want to be part of, and that at one point or another, and I think this is coming back maybe to what Hannah was getting to, yes, in the beginning, the Judaism we're going to give our children might be rammed down their throat. That's just the way it's going to be. But as they become teenagers, we need to change our modus operandi within our Judaism, that our children, and I'm talking about my children, and everybody can talk for their children, that my children will say, you know what? Daddy's got a good point. Daddy lives a great life. Daddy's having a good time with his Judaism. He's not losing out by being frum. He's actually having a great time. And if you're able to take your children from the ramming kind to the understanding kind, that is the job of the parents and the educators of teenagers. And we're not doing a good job with that. But if children, and even in the Haredi community, a lot of people are disengaged because of that, because they feel people don't understand me. People don't value me. And it's all about the system and nothing's about me. And I think if we can give our children the feeling this is about you, and the reason I'm doing this is because of you, you're going to get the best life possible, not only in the next world. I think my children need to understand that living a Jewish life gives them the best life here, that they're actually having a brilliant time. Shabbos is brilliant and kosher is brilliant, and you can have a great time being a frum Jew. You don't have to live in the ghetto and be beaten up. Being Jewish is wonderful, right? And if you grow up with that kind of mentality and your children grow up like that, they'll want to follow you. Will they choose a different flavor? Will they choose a different shade than you do? Maybe, but in general, they will still stick to the values that you wanted to. So to answer the question, is a Jewish school right for every child? Not necessarily. But every child deserves a Jewish education. Every child needs to be brought in with an education that's going to make them want to be Jewish, whether it is by sending them to a non-Jewish school and supplementing that, or by sending them to a Jewish school. But it's the home, it's the school, it's the environment, and it's everything that you create for your child. And all that together, if you're lucky, your children, and if you have mazan, you have atzlach, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu blesses you, hopefully you'll have nachas from your children. But there is no nachas pill. I wish there was a nachas pill we could all take, and our children would give us nachas from today and forever.
Yeah, you'd find Jewish grandmothers all over the world overdosing. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
And that's because they don't see their grandchildren often enough. If they knew what was really going on, they wouldn't be overdosing as much, because I see their children.
I'm going to just throw in one last comment from Nora Greenberg. I had no choice with my son, and he has amazing Jewish values, and I wanted to choose that because David has tremendous Jewish values, and he is such a vibrant, lively part of our shul and our shul family. And I would hope that people that come to our shul get that sense of passion, of enthusiasm, particularly if you look at all the young Jewish families that are joining. I hope that one of the reasons that they come is because we're accepting and that we do celebrate what's good about our differences and also our strong points as well. We celebrate the religious points.
The email you just sent me last week or 2 weeks ago from somebody in the community saying that, that part of what they love about the community is the fact that we're so accepting. We never look down at him for the fact that he was lesser religious, and that, he got the help from the community that he needed, regardless of, his religious stance. And he felt he was very well supported by the community, and at no point in time did anybody ever say, oh, you're not frum, so we're not going to help you.
No, there's zero judgment here. You're always welcome, all of you, to every bit of the Shrubs family, but also particularly Sunday night discussions. We very much enjoyed doing them, and the very positive feedback that we're getting means that it makes it all worthwhile, and I think we'll continue with these. So next week we're going to get back on track. We will be learning. So next week's topic, again, I think I touched on this last week, but we're going to be talking about some of Manchester's hidden Jews, if you like. The Jews that we don't necessarily know that are living amongst us because they are disconnected from the community, but still very much need our help, both in terms of just human connection to a community and feeling part of a community, but also in terms of the support from a social perspective. So we're going to look at those together. I think we're going to be joined by Rafi Bloom of the Fed. So we're going to be looking at that. Because they have some very interesting statistics about Jews living in all different areas. And I think it challenges our preconceptions, because we all have, I have an image in my head of what a Prestwich Jew looks like, what a Broughton Park Jew looks like, and a Whitefield Jew. And I'm too guilty of not looking further than that. So let's meet some of the other people and look at that discussion. We will end on that. Great discussion. Thanks you so much. Thank you very much for joining us. We will see you again next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.